Just as a warning, this video will contain images that are graphic and upsetting in nature, so viewer discretion is advised. In her book on photography, Susan Sontag makes the argument that photography is an act of consumption. Collecting photographs, creating something tangible out of the intangible, it's a form of artistic expression and equally an appropriation of the world around us. They can distort and document in equal measure. And in today's world of AI generated images and videos, where does the truth lie? For that matter, what is the truth? And as artists and creators, what are our ethical responsibilities to the world? Welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome to the Media Literacy Guidebook. In today's video, we're going to discuss the ethics of media creation. This isn't meant to be a comprehensive examination of ethics, but more of an overview to get you thinking about the topic. As artists, we must be aware that what we create, how we create it, and how both implied and overt messages we're trying to convey can affect our audience and the wider world. Let's return to Sontag for a moment. How would you feel if I said that the act of photography allows us to violate social norms? Have you ever considered if what you're photographing or filming is the ethical thing to do? Sontag makes the argument that photography in particular can interfere with or ignore whatever is going on, making a comparison of photography to sexual voyeurism. A voyeur doesn't want the event in front of them to stop, and neither does the photographer or the documentarian or the TikTok personality. Sontag continues.
There is something predatory in the act of taking a picture. To photograph people is to violate them by having knowledge of them they can never have. It turns people into objects that can be symbolically possessed. Just as the camera is a sublimation of the gun, to photograph someone is a sublimated murder, a soft murder appropriate to a sad, frightened time. Eventually, people might learn to act out more of their aggressions with cameras and fewer with guns, with the price of being an even more image-choked world.
While here in America we're still dealing with the gun problem, you can definitely see Sontag's words in our current media state. We're saturated with images, videos, and music, millions of terabytes of media, and we're always adding more. To be clear, this isn't itself necessarily a bad thing. As I previously mentioned, the democratization of media is a definite boon to humanity, and having easy and relatively cheap access to media creation tools is fantastic. It allows us to give voices to the otherwise voiceless. It empowers marginalized communities and people to share their stories, their cultures, and their messages. The flip side of ease of access, however, is in the lack of consideration for other people's lives. You don't need me to tell you about drama content, rage bait, filming people without their consent, and the myriad of other, frankly, terrible things we see on the internet daily. To some people, this is entertainment. Frankly, I'm not above this. I like watching fail videos and car crash videos. I'm just as culpable in this regard. But to the people in these videos whose lives we're living vicariously through, often for the worst for our own enjoyment, how do they feel about this? How does that psychologically, physiologically damage someone? Could you put yourself in their shoes? Would you want your dirty laundry to be aired out in public for the 7 plus billion people in the world to see? What if it was you being filmed? I've watched a lot of how to YouTube videos, how to grow, what equipment to use, reaching out to people, whatever. But I've never seen in any of those videos a discussion of the ethics. I could also make an educated guess and assume that the vast majority of similar videos, how to Instagram, TikTok, whatever flavor of the month social media website, is the same way, right? Why? And look, I get it. Culpability is a difficult thing to own. Nobody likes to admit that they've contributed to someone's pain. But the truth of the matter is that many of us have, regardless of our intentions, and many will still continue to do this willingly for the sake of clicks and money. If we want to start changing our ways, we have to look inwards and really deeply consider if what we're creating is ethical. So, how can we do this? Admittedly, I don't have a full answer, but I do have a couple of thoughts and points to consider. Let's dive in. We return to Paul Lester's book, Visual Communication Images with Messages. In it, he discusses 6 perspectives of analyzing images, the ethical perspective being one of them. He describes the ethical perspective as the moral and ethical responsibilities that the producer, the subject, and the viewer of the work have. And that's interesting. The responsibility of ethics of creation falls not only on the creator, but the subject of the piece and the audience. We've already spoken about the creator's responsibility, but let's consider the others. The subject is usually allowing for the creation or documentation to occur. What if they don't? What if they do and the creator misinterprets what the subject is trying to communicate? And as audience members, should we reward unethical behavior in creation? Lester argues for 6 principal philosophies when considering the ethical perspective, which we can use when considering these and similar questions. First, the categorical imperative. Immanuel Kant established this principle in the 18th century. Categorical is another way of saying unconditional, no exceptions. As Lester puts it, right is right and must be done even under the most extreme circumstances. The idea here is consistent behavior. You must apply the same ethical standards regardless of the situation. Next, utilitarianism, or the belief in the greatest good for the greatest number of people, stemming from Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. You imagine the various consequences of an act, and generally speaking, the outcome that helps the most people is the best choice. Mill also emphasizes that each individual's moral and legal rights must be met before applying the utilitarian calculus. That is to say, you have to consider your own ethics as well as the ethics of the audience and subject. The example in Lester's text illustrates it best. A photojournalist might take a picture of a disturbing scene. Although this picture could offend people, the journalist might submit the picture anyway since it can help people through awareness, education, or direct action. It may be able to persuade people to do something. As Lester says, this is acceptable since under this philosophy, people do not have a moral right not to be occasionally offended. The third point is hedonism, attributed to the Greek philosopher Aristippus. He believed that people should act to maximize pleasure now and not worry about the future, but this was in reference to pleasures of the mind, not physical sensation. He is known for saying, I possess, I am not possessed. For our purposes, hedonism is considering only the aesthetic pleasure of an image. Next is the golden mean, turning to your boy Aristotle. Simply put, this is finding a middle ground between 2 extreme points. Lester mentions compromise and negotiation as key points here, finding a link between opposing viewpoints of 2 competing interests. So, for example, we will turn to the thought of taking a picture of a disturbing scene. Could there be a less upsetting way to tell this story? What might be some possible alternatives that will still get your message across? The golden rule is our 5th philosophy. We've all heard this in some form or another. Treat others the way you want to be treated. You should strive to be as humane as possible when creating and reduce, if not eliminate entirely, harm to others. Examples include not filming grieving relatives at a funeral, showing faces at the nude beach, or filming people at the gym without their consent. The final philosophy is John Rawls' veil of ignorance. It's putting yourself in someone else's shoes and considering all people to be equal. As Lester says, no one class of people is entitled to advantages over any other. It's really about respect for yourself and other people. These are excellent points to consider when we create our art, but it's a little dense and very theory heavy. Luckily, Dr. Denny Elliott provides us with a checklist of sorts to consider when we're creating. 1. Does the taking and displaying of the photo fit the social responsibility of the photographer? 2. Has anyone's rights been violated in the taking and displaying of the picture? 3. Does the display of the image meet the needs of its viewers? 4. Is it aesthetically appealing? 5. Does the picture choice reflect moderation as opposed to sensationalism? 6. Does the picture reflect empathy for the subject's feelings? 7. Would the photographer support this creation if they were the subject? 8. Does the message cause unjustified harm?
Let me ask you to read the last few lines of your book, because I think they bring me very close to understanding what you're saying about the difference between the images we see on television and in the papers and what really happens to people in war.
Sure.
I've underlined, you can start anywhere you want to.
Sure. These dead are supremely uninterested in the living, in those who took their lives, in witnesses, and in us. Why should they seek our gaze? What would they have to say to us? We, this we is everyone who has never experienced anything like what they went through, we don't understand. We don't get it. We truly can't imagine what it was like. We can't imagine how dreadful, how terrifying war is, and how normal it becomes. Can't understand, can't imagine. That's what every soldier and every journalist and aid worker and independent observer who has put in time under fire and had the luck to elude the death that struck down others nearby stubbornly feels. And they are right.
As I mentioned before, this isn't the end of a discussion of epics. It's barely the tip of the iceberg, and it's a really fascinating rabbit hole. But I hope that today's lesson provided some insights looking into the ethics of media creation. Try to be kind and considerate no matter what you make, because the messages you create can truly affect the world around you. 2 recommended media for you today. The first is, well, Sontag's book on photography. While the focus is specifically on that art, there's a lot of really interesting takeaways that can be applied to any form of media you create. It should be easily obtainable online or through your local library or online store. This second recommendation might be a little harder to obtain, but is absolutely worth it. F for Fake, directed by and starring Orson Welles. This is a documentary slash docudrama that looks into the concepts of authenticity, values of art, and the nature of truth-telling in media. To say any more than that is to spoil it. Do yourself a favor and watch this if you can get your hands on it. As always, don't forget that if you have any questions for me or suggestions on what you'd like me to talk about next, comment down below or email me at professorgoggles@gmail.com. Also, a special thank you to Jan Tevela for providing her wonderful voiceover. You can catch her over at twitch.tv/Jan Tevela. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again real soon. Take care.